Hey there, in this video we're going to take a simple tune, 4-chord song, Amazing Grace, and apply some basic reharmonization techniques, specifically upper structure triads, cluster voicings, and some basic reharmonizations. So first we'll talk about upper structure triads and define what is an upper structure triad. Upper structure triads are triads that are played over an underlying harmony that include at least one non-chord tone. Typically what we want to do is avoid notes, non-chord tones that are half step higher than a chord tone. So unless we're doing a flat 9, a dominant 7 flat 9 chord. So if you're doing D7 flat 9, well then an E flat would be an available note to create our upper structure. Now don't get this confused with just extending a triad to create a 7th chord. So for instance, if we had a C major chord and we played a B, and so now we have an E minor over C, essentially E, G, B over C. We don't typically think of that as an upper structure. Now, it certainly is a chord that you can play. It sounds good in certain circumstances, but when we're talking about upper structures, usually we mean we're going to add a 9, 11, or a 13 to the voicing. So if we played a G chord over a C, so G, B, D, and then put a C into the bass, now we have an upper structure. That would be another way of doing it. We have a G chord up here, put our C in the bass, and we have an upper structure triad. Now the song we're playing, Amazing Grace, we're going to be doing it in the key of D. So on the D chord, D, F sharp, and A, one of the upper structures we might do is a B minor chord. So we might find B, D, and F sharp with a D on the bottom. Or we might have an A chord, an A, C sharp, and E over the D. So in this case, we're leaving out the F sharp. And you don't always have to leave out one of the chord tones and substitute it in. But on the guitar, we run out of fingers, we run out of strings, so this is just how we do it sometimes. When we get to the G chord, one of the options we could do is play a G add 9, but if we specifically think of it in terms of D, F sharp, and A, and get that G on the bottom, leave out the B, it gives us a different flavor than just a G add 9. Sometimes people call this this is actually a G major 7 add 9. Some people might call this a G major 7 sus 2, but whatever. We're thinking of it in terms of what triad could I play over this bass note that would still be harmonically appropriate. One more chord that we'll be using is the A major chord. So your typical A major chords like this. Well, what if we played an E minor over that A major chord? So for this example, I'm going to play my E minor inverted up here. So I have my E, my G, and my B over the A and the bass. So once again, on the A major chord, it's an A, C sharp, and E. So here's my E, I can add that G on there, so now it's an A7 chord, and by adding the B, I've made it a 9, so it's really an A9 chord, but once again, we're thinking of it in terms of what triad could I play over this root note that would be harmonically appropriate. So that's just a really fast primer on what upper structure triads are and how you could use them. Cluster voicings. A cluster voice is built in seconds. Now, those are really easy to play on the piano because you can just take your fist, pound it down on the piano, and mash a bunch of keys together, and that's your cluster voice. On the guitar, it gets a little bit trickier. So say we have a D major chord. So it's D, F sharp, and A. And we want to make that a D major chord with an added 9th. We want to add an E to it. Well, if I have my D, F sharp, and A like this, well, I could go D, F sharp, A. If I want my E, well, I could take out the F sharp, but I lose a note to gain the E major, or the E there. So if I wanted this voice specifically, D, E, F sharp, A, it could be a challenge. So on the guitar, we are somewhat limited in how we can accomplish this. But one common way to do that is to use the open strings that we have available to us. So this D here can be played up on the 12th fret. So if I do that, it leaves my high E string open for that D, and then I have my F sharp on the 11th fret of the G string. So D, E, F sharp becomes D, E, F sharp, and then I can add my A if I want to. There it is. I have my D add 9 done as a cluster voice, instead of typically you'll do something like that. The other thing that you can do is, when harmonically appropriate, and when I say harmonically appropriate, what I really mean is, if it sounds good, you can do it. If it doesn't sound good, then you probably shouldn't do it. And so always use your ear. Don't just blindly change chords just because in theory it should work. You always want to play it first. But changing triads in the 7th chords, diatonic or non-diatonic, is always an option that's there for you. And one of the ones that I like to do, especially in transitions, is do the one with the minor 7th in the bass. So I take a D chord, in this case, D is my 1 chord, and I'll play a C on the bottom. So where harmonically appropriate, we might throw that in there. Also, when you're using a melody, sometimes you can reharmonize. All you do is you say, okay, well, what other chords also have this note in it? So at the beginning of Amazing Grace, we'll go A to D. Well, a G chord also has a D in it. So the D chord is D, F sharp, and A. The G chord is G, B, and D. So I could go to my 1 chord, or I could go is an option. It isn't a dissonance for me to do that. So look for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play through Amazing Grace once, just using the basic triads and not filling it in much, and then I'll play through it again, adding some of these ideas and techniques, and you'll see that it really comes alive when I do that. So here we go.